what's up? Today, I'm gonna show you guys my favorite way to serve in-season summertime tomatoes. This is a dish that I thought of as a restaurant chef, and I would run it every year as soon as tomatoes hit the farmer's market. I call it a tomato tartine, and it's essentially an open-faced sandwich with a very luxurious, rich, creamy pistachio pesto topped with juicy, height-of-the-season heirloom tomatoes. It's sick. To get started, I'll grab my food processor. If you don't have one, hang tight. I've got you covered there as well. Into the bowl, I'll combine 50 grams of fresh stem-free basil. That's about 2 of the clamshells that they sell at the grocery store, so $8 worth of basil, give or take. Next, I'll add in 15 grams of stem-free parsley, 15 grams of stem-on cilantro, then 50 grams of salted, lightly roasted pistachios. If you wanted something more traditional, I'd say go for the pine nut. These are the classic pesto nut for good reason, because they're super creamy and they taste amazing, but they're also really expensive, and about 25% of the time they're rancid from sitting on the shelf for too long. The third option that I really like for this pesto is a toasted and salted almond. These are cheap, widely available, and play the role of savory, creamy nut really well. Behind the nuts, I'll add in 15 grams of rinsed and minced red onion, 115 grams of extra virgin olive oil, and 50 grams of aged Parmesan cheese. In the spirit of keeping things premium, like with the pistachios, I'm going to be using a 24-month Parmesan imported from Parma. To get this boulder of beautiful aged cheese ready for pesto, I grated it on the smallest hold sides of my box grater. You really want it ground into a nice cheese gravel here, or cheese dust, as opposed to a feather style shred. Next, I'll zest 1 lemon with my microplane, and then I'll add in the juice of half of that zested lemon. Lastly, I'll add in 3 grams of salt, and once everyone's in the pool, I'll pop on the lid and give the whole thing a spin for 20 to 30 seconds. I'll mention now that a lot of people would consider using a food processor instead of a mortar and pestle to make pesto as sacrilegious. And I get it, the blades can beat up the herbs and ruin their aroma, but only if you spin it for too long. I'd say spin this for no longer than is absolutely necessary to break down the basil and the nuts. After about 20 seconds or so, I'll stop spinning, and now we can take a look. As you can see, the herbs, cheese, and oil are all spun into an opaque, light emulsion, and they've maintained their bright chlorophyll-y greenness. Texture-wise, it's smooth and saucy, but still has a little bit of chunkiness from the nuts. That's important. You definitely don't want a paste here. In my mind, the pistachio's soft, luxurious texture should stand out in the final dish. Now, real quick, I'll show you how to make this by hand. I'll start with 50 grams of basil and then gently chiffonade it in 2 different directions. When doing a sauce like this with the knife, you definitely run a higher risk of smushing and bruising the basil. So the move is to slice it one way gently, turn it 90 degrees, and then slice it the other. Next, I'll combine the parsley, cilantro, and 3 grams of salt. Adding the salt up front this time adds some grit and abrasion to help break down the herbs faster, and it helps keep the chlorophyll from oxidizing and turning brown. So greener pesto. Once these herbs are most of the way broken down, I'll add in my onions, then my pine nuts, and I'm using pine nuts here instead of pistachios just because they're softer and easier to chop down. Once the onions, pine nuts, and all the herbs are chopped down like this, I'm going to move the basil pile into the parsley pile and keep on chopping. Now I'll move this herb and nut pile into a glass bowl, then I'll add the Parmesan cheese, the lemon zest, the lemon juice, and then the olive oil. I'll stir that to combine, and the nuts and cheese are going to soak up a decent amount more olive oil than the first batch, so I'll glug in a few more drips here, let's call it 30 more grams, and there we go. It's rustic looking, that's for sure, but it tastes great and does not require a food processor or a mortar and pestle. It's kind of like pesto chimichurri. Next, we need to figure out the bread for this open-faced sandwich. For that, I've got a 1 kilo loaf of rustic sourdough bread. I bought this one from Union Loafers Bread Bakery here in St. Louis, but if you wanted to make your own rustic loaf, I think the Big Dog loaf from my video 1 Dough 3 Loaves would be ideal for non-sourdough people, or the Your First Sourdough video would be great for people who already have an active sourdough starter. I'll link to both of those videos below. Now, using a serrated knife, I'm going to cut this loaf into 5 to 6 thick, chunky slices. You'll notice that I'm starting closer to the center of the loaf because I want the slices to be of a certain size. The smaller edges are great for snacking, but not for making a jumbo tartine. Thickness wise, I'd say shoot for something that's about 3/4 of an inch thick. Any thinner than that probably won't hold the weight of all the toppings, and any thicker would be a chore to chew on. Okay, over at the stove, my broiler's been preheating over high heat, so next I'm going to set up my slice of bread on a little sheet tray, and then I'll throw it under the broil for about 30 to 60 seconds per side. Stay frosty though. Broilers in general are extremely variable in terms of temperature, so I'd say just use your eyeballs instead of a timer. Halfway through, as you can see, I've got a nice char around the edges, and the middle of the slice is lightly golden brown and just starting to get brittle. A quick flip here and it's back under the broiler for another 30 seconds. While that finishes toasting, I'm gonna unpack this giant box of meat that I just got from the sponsor of this video, ButcherBox. ButcherBox delivers 100% grass-fed beef, free-range organic chicken, crate-free pork, and wild-caught seafood directly to your door. To order, you just choose from one of their 4 curated boxes, or you could even make your own custom box. The box shows up at your door frozen and packed in this eco-friendly recyclable box. What I like most about ButcherBox, other than the fact that this meat tastes delicious, is that they only source from farmers and fishermen who meet the highest standards for quality. This meat is in pristine shape inside of these vacuum bags. It's not one of those mushy icicles that you get from the grocery store. And right now, for a limited time, they're giving new members free bacon for life. That means 1 pack of uncured bacon added to every box for the life of your membership. Their bacon is humanely raised, crate-free, and made without antibiotics or any added hormones. There's no added sugar or nitrates or nitrites added. So if you want to get high-quality meats delivered to your door and never pay for bacon again, use the link in my description to sign up for ButcherBox. Free bacon for life. I feel like I need to mention that again. The link is in my description. Thank you, ButcherBox. After about 60 to 90 seconds of toasting, I'm going to pull out my bread and take a look. I'd call this perfectly toasted. With lean sourdough breads especially, you really don't want to over toast them because they're going to be glassy and just totally rip apart your mouth. Plus, the inside crumb on a bread like this is custardy and soft, and we want to maintain that instead of drying it out. Now, I'll set that aside briefly while I cut the tomatoes for this tartine. Real quick, my advice for buying the right tomatoes here is to stick more towards the medium-sized ones. The huge heirlooms always look really good, but in my experience, they're mostly water weight and full of seed gel as opposed to nice tomato flesh. Now, to slice these, I'm going to use a serrated knife because I think that gets through the skin of the tomato a lot easier. A regular chef's knife would work, but it needs to be above average sharpness. Thickness wise, I'd say cut these just over a 1/4 inch. Too thick and the tomatoes will be too chunky to stay on the open-faced sandwich. When you get to the stem end, you'll see that firm interior white stuff. That stuff is edible, but not the best, so I'll save that for like a bread salad or a tomato sauce. Once I got a few slices of each color, I'm going to scoot them off to the side and then build my tartine. The first thing down is about 2, maybe 3 tablespoons of the pistachio pesto. I really like to work it into the holes of the bread here so that the olive oil inside the sauce can saturate the bread. And make sure you get it spread evenly from edge to edge. That's going to be the glue that holds the tomatoes on top. Speaking of those, next I'm going to shingle on my thinly sliced heirloom tomatoes, making sure to press each tomato into the pesto each time I lay a new one down. That's going to help these tomatoes stick to each other and the pesto so that it doesn't just fully fall apart after the first bite. Once the tomatoes are firmly in place, I'm going to hit all 4 of them with a generous amount of flaky maldon salt. Yes, regular salt would work fine, but flaky salt brings a ton of bright salinity and contrast as opposed to regular salt, which just makes it more salty. Next, I'll add a ton of cracked black pepper, like a lot of that, then a few strong pinches of red chili flake, and then finally I'll drizzle the whole thing with some additional extra virgin olive oil. And for me, that's just about as summer as it gets. The freshness of the basil and tomato are on full display here, and the full spectrum of taste and texture is in every single bite. It's herbal, it's unctuous, it's juicy, it's custardy from the sourdough bread. It looks pretty, it tastes pretty, and I think it's probably the perfect dish for a summertime dinner party. Serve some cold white wine in this tartine, and everyone is gonna think you're a genius. Let's eat this thing.